plastic fork still trembled in my hand as he leaned in and said, "Mom, you should learn to stay quiet." Still, I smiled and tucked it into the napkin. Like silence had always been part of the plan. While the buzz of party chatter carried on, the hum of that insult pressed louder than the music. The same balloon I'd tied hours earlier drifted slowly above us, festive, weightless, and ignored. That's when I realized I wasn't being honored. I was being handled. So I stayed quiet and let that silence close every open tab they never planned to repay. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The park was already buzzing by 10. Orange balloons bobbed lazily above a picnic table strung with paper streamers, and the scent of grilling hot dogs tangled with the fall air. October cool but stubbornly sunny. Diane stood beside the table, tucking a final cupcake into the worn metal stand she'd brought from home. Vanilla bean with homemade cream cheese frosting, Benji's favorite. She'd arrived early as always, in jeans still damp at the hem from morning dew. She glanced at her watch, 40 minutes until guests were supposed to show. That meant 10 until Laura did. Right on cue, Diane heard the click of boots on the pavement behind her. Laura's voice followed, dry and lilting. "Oh, you made cupcakes again." Diane turned with a smile, too quick to be real. "Of course," Benji asked. Lara leaned in to inspect the top row. "They look rustic." Diane smoothed a swirl of frosting with her finger and laughed politely. "They're homemade." "Right," Lara said, already looking elsewhere. Eric arrived 15 minutes later, holding a grocery store cake in a clamshell box and laughing into his phone. He barely looked at the setup. "Hey, Ma," he said, setting the plastic cake down next to her stand. "You didn't need to go all Martha Stewart again. Just don't overdo it this year, okay?" It wasn't a joke, and Diane felt her ears heat. Guests trickled in. Eric's friends from work, Laura's sister, a couple of neighbors. Diane made sure everyone had paper plates and forks, offered juice boxes to the kids, and passed out hand wipes no one asked for. During lunch, Eric launched into a story, something about his promotion, his genius handling of a vendor negotiation. The numbers kept growing each time he told it. "That wasn't in May," Diane said gently. "It was July, remember? You were in Colorado in May." Eric didn't skip a beat. He just set his sandwich down and turned. "Mom, you should learn to stay quiet." It was a pin dropping in a silent gymnasium. Every head turned. Even the balloons seemed to sway slower. Diane smiled faintly, the way people do in hostage videos. "I'll go grab more lemonade," she said, picking up the empty pitcher like it had always been the plan. She walked toward the fountain, her footsteps too loud on the gravel path. She didn't cry, her face was too trained for that, but she blinked more than usual. "Hey," Nina called quietly behind her. Eric's ex. Diane had always liked her. "You okay?" Diane looked down at her hands, still holding the pitcher like it mattered. "I think I've been too available." It wasn't meant to come out like that, but once it did, it landed hard, like a door clicking shut somewhere deep inside her. She didn't go back to the party. She left the pitcher at the fountain, walked to her car, and sat behind the wheel, watching through the windshield as her son blew out the candles on the grocery store cake. No one noticed her car pull out of the lot. No one waved. Except Benji. He turned, frosting on his chin, eyes scanning. He raised a small hand, uncertain but deliberate. Diane raised hers back, but only halfway, before the SUV behind her honked. She drove off, her hand still hovering mid-air, and for the first time in years, she didn't circle back. She didn't wait for someone to call, because no one would. The next morning, the cupcakes still sat on her kitchen counter, untouched. The frosting had slumped in the night, softening under its own weight. Diane didn't throw them out, not yet. She brewed a pot of black coffee and carried it into the den, where 2 fireproof boxes waited on the floor beneath the built-in shelves. They'd been there for years, gathering dust, practically invisible. One was labeled Taxes, the other, in faded Sharpie, Eric. She sat cross-legged on the carpet and opened the second. Receipts, printed Venmo logs, copies of co-signed loan papers, a pink carbon copy from a bail bond service in Temecula. Even a snapshot of a cashier's check she'd written to cover Lara's hospital deductible the year Benji was born. There was no rage in her face, only precision. She reached for her legal pad, the one she used for Christmas lists and insurance calls, and started tallying. It wasn't just the big-ticket things. Mortgage cosign, down payment on the SUV. That month she paid the preschool when Eric forgot. It was the week-by-week erosion, groceries, phone plans, a replacement water heater for a condo Diane had never even seen. When she reached 82,450.12, she put the pen down. Nina called around noon. "Just checking in," she said gently. "You kind of ghosted yesterday." Diane hesitated. Then, "I was looking at some paperwork." "From the party?" Nina teased. "No," Diane said. Her voice was flat but focused. "From the last 12 years. There was a pause on the other end. Then Nina said carefully, "That's not help, that's a tab." Diane smiled, tired but real. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." She hung up and dialed a different number. A voice picked up on the second ring. "Miles Redford," the man said, his voice warm and clipped. He'd handled her will 5 years ago, back when Diane still believed in being fair, being generous, being endlessly available. "Miles," she said, "I think it's time to reassess some boundaries." There was a brief silence, then a knowing laugh. "I'm all ears." They spoke for 40 minutes. By the end of the call, her estate plan was set to be restructured, her accounts resecured, and her son, Eric, was officially removed as emergency contact and financial proxy. No more blank checks disguised as generosity. No more lines blurred by obligation. Just after she hung up, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. "Eric, can you help with Benji's birthday balance? Still pending." The nerve of it, like yesterday, hadn't happened. Like she hadn't walked away mid-party. Like he hadn't humiliated her in front of a dozen people and then watched her leave without even a glance. Diane didn't respond right away. She sat with the phone in her hand, thumb hovering. Then she opened the calculator app, typed in $82,450. 12 hows. She took a screenshot and attached it to a message. But she didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, she locked her phone, stood slowly, and walked to the cupcakes. She picked one up, vanilla bean, the frosting a little melted but still clinging. She took a bite, still sweet. Diane let the phone ring. It was a Sunday morning, just past 9, and Eric's name lit up the screen like it always did. Bold, insistent, entitled. He rarely called. Texting let him dodge tone, skip guilt, pretend her sacrifices were casual favors. But now, after that screenshot, she never sent. After the call to Miles, it felt different. He was calling to cash in. Again. She stared at the screen until it went dark. Then she turned the ringer off entirely. The voicemail notification pinged seconds later. She didn't open it. By 10, a new message popped up. Not from Eric this time, but from Lara, in the group chat labeled FAM. That Diane had never renamed, though she'd thought about it for months. "Lara, just need a little help. Like always, just the balance from the party. That heart emoji, the fake sparkle in it." Diane could almost hear Lara's voice behind the text, syrupy and casual, the way someone asks for a ride to the airport with zero intention of paying for gas. Diane typed slowly, then paused, deleted, typed again. "Diane, I'm scaling back. Please plan accordingly." She stared at it. Read it aloud once, softly, then hit send. The read receipt came within 5 seconds. No reply followed. Diane stood up from the breakfast table and opened the front curtains. Light poured into the living room, bright enough to catch the dust on the baseboards she'd always been too busy to clean. She stood there, watching nothing in particular, until the church bells across the street began to ring. She hadn't missed a Sunday in 18 years. Today, she dressed in navy slacks and a crisp blouse, but left the casserole dish on the counter untouched. No foil, no post-it note explaining the ingredients. For years, her post-church lunches had become an unspoken ritual. Eric and Lara would drift in behind her, Benji in tow, and she'd cook without being asked. Heat rolls, sliced tomatoes, set out the good napkins. But today, She walked out with only her Bible and keys. She sat alone in the pew. Not even Nina joined her this time, which made it easier. No need to explain what she wasn't doing. After service, the same polite wave of voices and handshakes swept through the lobby. Eric and Lara were there, Benji trailing behind them, but they didn't approach. They lingered near the donut table, waiting for Diane to make the first move. She didn't. Instead, she nodded once, turned, and walked out into the bright October sun. It wasn't until she was halfway to her car that Nina caught up. "You skipping the buffet today?" Nina asked, adjusting her purse strap. "Did hell freeze over?" Diane chuckled softly. "Something like that." They stopped beside her car, the wind tugging at the hem of Diane's blouse. "I told them to plan accordingly," she said. Nina raised a brow. "Plan accordingly. I'm done being a vending machine with a heartbeat." A short silence passed between them. Nina finally smiled. "You fed them long enough. Let them forage." Diane laughed for real this time. Not sharp, not bitter, just released. That night, she made roasted salmon with garlic and lemon, the kind she used to save for company. She steamed broccolini in real butter, not margarine. Opened a bottle of Chardonnay she'd bought for some other time. She set a single place at the table. No tray, no TV, no multitasking. Just the quiet click of the fork against her plate and the warm weight of solitude that, tonight, didn't feel like loneliness. It felt earned. Her phone buzzed once during the meal. She didn't check it. Instead, she chewed slowly, the tang of citrus waking up her tongue, and allowed herself to feel it, this new stillness, this quiet freedom. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause, but it felt like the first honest thing she'd done in years. After the dishes were clean, she finally picked up her phone. No new messages from Eric, no apology, no explanation. But there was a second voicemail from earlier. She stared at it, pressed play. "Hey, Mom. Not sure if you saw my text, but I just need a bit of help with the party stuff. It's not a big deal, just like a couple hundred. You always say Benji's your priority, right? So, anyway, call me back, please." He sounded tired, but not sorry. And Diane? She didn't feel guilt. She felt confirmation. The knock came at 6:42 a.m. Diane was already dressed, standing at the kitchen sink, watching the coastal fog roll in like a quiet storm across the marsh. She'd been up since 5, a new habit forming, early mornings with no one to serve but herself. The knock came again, this time louder. She dried her hands slowly, not rushing. By the time she opened the door, Lara was standing on the porch with a wheeled suitcase and a tote bag slung over one shoulder. Her hair was curled, her nails perfect. She wore travel leggings, gold hoops, and an expression like this was all perfectly routine. Benji stood beside her, half asleep, holding a stuffed dinosaur by one leg. "We're heading to Savannah," Lara said, breezy. "Just 2 nights. You don't mind, right?" Diane blinked. "I wasn't asked. I was told." Lara gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just for a quick thing, Eric's conference. And I could really use the hotel bathtub. The school's closed Monday, remember?" Diane stepped aside but didn't move to take the suitcase. Instead, she handed Lara a piece of paper, neatly typed, single-spaced. At the top, Diane Marsh. Availability calendar, Q4. Bold X's marked most weekends, a few full weeks in December. A note at the bottom read, "Personal commitments are not subject to override. Please arrange alternate care." Lara's mouth opened slightly, as if the oxygen had thinned. "What is this?" "Clarity," Diane said, in case texts weren't doing the job. Benji looked up at her. "Can I stay anyway?" he whispered, eyes wide. It cracked something in Diane, that boyish whisper, that plea. She crouched and ran a hand through his hair. "Not this time, sweetheart," she said gently, "but I'll see you very soon." He hugged her hard, burying his face into her coat. Then, reluctantly, he let go and followed Lara back down the walkway. Neither of them said goodbye. The silence afterward was cool and intact, like glass that had finally set. Diane didn't pace. She didn't recheck her phone. She didn't call Nina to vent. She just poured a second cup of coffee and opened her weather app. By 8:30, She was in the passenger seat of Nina's SUV, sunglasses on, road snacks in a cooler at her feet. Beaufort? Nina asked as they passed the town sign. Yep, Diane said. Antique stores, shrimp baskets, and that bookstore with the cat that won't move from the front counter. God, yes. The day unspooled in a way Diane hadn't experienced in years. Slow, self-directed, no guilt clock ticking in the background. They wandered shops, lost track of time over iced tea and fried green tomatoes. She bought herself a linen scarf, one she didn't need, in a soft pine green. When they sat on the pier, wind tangling their hair, Diane took a photo, not to post, but just to remember. She was mid-laugh when her phone buzzed in her lap. Eric, 2 missed calls. Voicemail, 1 new. Diane didn't open it, but she knew he would call again. And sure enough, it rang again just as they pulled into her driveway at dusk. She answered this time, on speaker, with Nina there beside her. Mom, Eric's voice came through tight, clipped. What the hell is going on? Hello to you too. You really couldn't just watch him for one weekend? Are we really doing this now? I wasn't asked, she said calmly. I was cornered. You used to help, you used to be family. Is this who you're becoming now? There was a long, still pause. Diane's voice didn't tremble. No, it's who I've always been. I just stopped apologizing for it. Silence on the other end. Then a click. He hung up. Diane set the phone down like it was just any other object, no longer fused to her like a leash. Nina looked over at her. You okay? I think, Diane said slowly. I'm finally starting to be. She reached into the bag beside her and pulled out the pine green scarf, still folded with the tag on. She handed it to Nina. For you. I didn't buy you anything, Nina said, surprised. I bought me the rest of my life, Diane replied. You can have the scarf. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper, an old Charleston townhouse converted into something sterile and still. Diane sat across from Miles Redford, the same oak desk between them as the day she'd signed her first will 15 years ago. Back then, she'd still worn her wedding ring. She'd still believed that generosity was its own kind of protection. Now, she knew better. Miles adjusted his glasses, flipping through the folder she'd brought. He was careful, methodical, his voice a steady current. You've made quite a few notes, he said with a trace of admiration. You don't want to amend the existing will, you want to replace it entirely. I do, Diane said, calm and certain. I'm not adding layers, I'm removing illusions. He smiled at that. That's a good line. I've had time to think. The pen in her hand felt heavy, expensive, deliberate. Miles walked her through the new structure piece by piece, his tone professional but quietly impressed. So you're creating a protected education fund for your grandson, Benji. That's smart. He'll have access at 18, unrestricted by his parents. That's the point, Diane said. He deserves a clean start. And Eric and Lara, Miles asked, eyes flicking to the prior beneficiary list she'd neatly crossed out in blue ink. They're removed, she said simply. They've already received more than their share. Miles looked up. Do you want to include a note about that? Sometimes a simple sentence can prevent contesting. She'd already written it. Handwritten, steady. All previous financial support, gifts, and payments to Eric Marsh and Lara Marsh are hereby considered full repayment for any future inheritance or claim to this estate. Miles read it twice, then nodded slowly. That's clean. Final. Diane leaned back in her chair, watching him staple the amendment packet together. Good, I'm done leaving open tabs. The clock ticked softly in the quiet. A fountain pen scratched, the paperwork built into a stack, and by the end of the hour, her old life had been replaced, line by line, with something simpler, honest, weighted toward the one person who still had time to learn what love without condition could mean. When she stood to leave, Miles handed her a sealed copy. I've seen a lot of people try to settle scores this way, he said. This isn't that. No, Diane said, slipping the packet into her tote. It's not revenge, it's release. That night, she and Nina sat on the back porch with mugs of coffee, the air cool and quiet except for the low hum of crickets. A low tide smell drifted in from the marsh. The stars looked clean. So, the famous will meeting, Nina said, nudging her. How'd it feel? Final, Diane said. Then, after a sip, Peaceful, Nina smiled. You always were better at cleaning house than you gave yourself credit for. Diane pulled a folded envelope from her bag and placed it on the table between them. There's one more thing, she said. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy. I want you to have them. Nina froze. Diane. I trust you, Diane said. Not because we're close, but because you don't owe me anything. That landed between them with quiet gravity. Nina nodded, blinking a few times before tucking the envelope into her purse. You know this means if I find you doing something reckless, like forgiving him again, I get to intervene. Diane smiled. You'll have your work cut out for you, they both laughed. The kind of laugh that only comes when something old has finally died a clean death. Later, after Nina left, Diane poured herself one glass of red wine and stood by the window. The streetlight cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, the kind that made the house feel like it was stretching into new shapes. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Eric. Why are you acting like a stranger? She stared at the words. They pulsed faintly, like a question that wanted to be forgiven before it was even finished being asked. She typed back, but not right away. Her thumbs hovered. Then she erased what she'd written twice before settling on nothing at all. Silence was still her sharpest answer. Instead, she reached for the wine, took a slow sip, and whispered to the empty room. Maybe I just stopped being your safety net. The clock on the wall ticked over to midnight. In the file drawer by her desk, the new will rested. Fresh ink, notarized, locked tight. Her house, her savings, her story, all rewritten. Not taken from anyone. Simply reclaimed. The thank you note went up on a Tuesday. Diane noticed it taped crookedly to the diner's wall, right beside the jukebox that still played Elvis if you fed it a crumpled dollar. A little handwritten sign, blue ink on lined stationery. Gifted in honor of unseen givers. Meals paid forward for anyone too tired to ask. Anonymous friend. She didn't say anything, just smiled faintly, ordered her usual decaf, and slid into the booth by the window where the sunlight came in slanted and kind. She came here now every Thursday after her volunteer shift at the church pantry. Not that anyone knew. She wore gloves, tied her apron, stocked shelves with canned vegetables, boxed mac, and tiny hotel soaps, then left quietly through the side door when her time was up. No selfies, no announcements. It felt better than any dinner she'd ever hosted. No one took her presence for granted. No one acted like her effort was an expected service, preloaded with guilt. Last week, a woman had taken her hand as Diane handed over a carton of rice and lentils and said, with eyes full of something raw, "You don't know what this means." She hadn't meant the food. That night, Diane found a small envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a card made of thick, textured paper with pressed lavender on the front. Thank you. For seeing people like me. For showing up without being asked. You helped more than you'll ever know. It was the first handwritten thank you Diane had received in almost 4 years. She kept it tucked in her wallet behind her driver's license. One afternoon on the porch, Nina sipped her iced tea and glanced over. You're glowing lately. What gifts? Diane leaned back in her chair, the wood warm beneath her legs, just choosing where to show up. You're not funding vacations anymore, Nina said, wry. Guess that helps. I'm feeding people who don't insult me afterward, Diane replied. It's different, Nina cackled. You're gonna get that stitched on a pillow? Maybe engraved on a bench. They clinked glasses like women who knew exactly what they'd survived. The cicadas droned overhead, unbothered by the quiet thunder rumbling beneath their conversation. That evening, Diane logged onto Facebook for the first time in weeks, mostly to check a recipe someone had posted in the church group. She hadn't intended to scroll, but the algorithm knew her too well. Laura's name floated to the top of her feed. A meme, black cursive over a dusty pink background. Some people just stop showing up. Remember that. Below, a string of sympathetic likes and a few comments. Hate when that happens. Just know who loves you, girl. Their loss. Diane stared at it for a moment, then exhaled a single amused breath. They still thought the hurt came from distance. They didn't understand she hadn't left them. She'd stopped being a doormat disguised as support. And now, she was exactly where she wanted to be. Quiet, intentional, free. She clicked out of the app, wiped her phone screen with the hem of her shirt, and slid it into the kitchen drawer, face down. Tomorrow was pantry day again. She'd already baked banana bread to bring along. Her hands still smelled like cinnamon. Miles didn't mince words. Eric's retained a probate attorney, he said over the phone, voice smooth but tighter than usual. They haven't filed anything yet, but he's hinting at incapacity. Says you're not in a clear state of mind. Whatever that's meant to imply. Diane's fork paused midair. Broccoli speared neatly at the end. She set it down without a twitch. He thinks I'm senile because I stopped giving him money. Miles exhaled. Equal parts lawyer and longtime observer. The courts won't take it seriously without evidence. But to preempt things, I'd recommend a capacity evaluation. You schedule it. Take the tests. We get a third-party report in your file. Make the appointment, Diane said, already standing. Let's waste his time officially. The office was bright, too bright. All white walls, soft carpets, motivational posters printed in cursive about the power of gratitude and sleep hygiene. The psychologist was in her early 50s, wiry and efficient, with a quick smile and notepad that never seemed to stop moving. Cognitive screening, memory sequencing, executive functioning, language, she explained. Just a little mental oil check. I'm not the one stalling at green lights, Diane said dryly, and the woman laughed. They started with numbers, patterns, timed puzzles, and picture matching. Then came logic problems, real ones, not the kind Facebook tagged you in. Diane breezed through them. When asked to name animals starting with the letter C, she rattled off 12 in under 20 seconds, then added, and that's not counting my son. The examiner choked on her coffee. Mrs. Marsh, I think you'll be just fine. The report came in a padded envelope, crisp and formal. Subject is fully oriented to person, place, time, and recent events. No signs of cognitive impairment, diminished capacity, or decision-making deficits. Patient appears in full control of her faculties. Sharp as ever, no concerns. Diane sat with it for a moment, letting the words settle. Then she folded the letter neatly, slid it into a large manila envelope, and added a single yellow sticky note on top. Next time, call first. She mailed it to Eric's address. No signature, no message, just evidence. That evening, Nina showed up with enchiladas and wine. Like some kind of boundary-enforcing fairy godmother. So, she said, passing over a glass, you, my friend, are officially of sound mind. How's that feel? Vindicating, Diane said, sipping. But mostly, freeing. Nina arched a brow. Freeing? I think I always knew they saw me as convenient, Diane said. But now? I know they also thought I was stupid. That's the part I never let myself see. Nina nodded slowly. And now that you do? Diane smiled, soft and sure. Now I stop explaining myself. They ate on the couch, plates balanced on their knees, while the local news mumbled in the background. Diane wasn't watching it. She was thinking about the last time Eric called her confused during a family dinner because she dared to correct his retelling of a story about Benji's birth. She'd let it slide. She'd laughed like it didn't sting. Not anymore. She wasn't confused. She was just done pretending she was the kind of woman who didn't remember every slight. The next day, her phone stayed silent. No text, no call, no apology. But Diane didn't need one, because now she had something better than an apology. A notarized, dated report that made her bulletproof. And Eric? He'd just tried to light a match in a house made of whetstone. The letter came on a Wednesday, tucked inside an envelope with crooked handwriting and a superhero stamp in the corner. No return address, just Benji Marsh in big, determined letters. Diane opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper, wide ruled and creased from being folded too many times. Hi, Nana. Daddy says I shouldn't miss you, but I do. I told him that, and he said not to say it again. I like your house better because it smells like cookies and your couch is squishier. Also, you listen. Nobody else listens. I got a 93 on my math test. Love, Benji. Don't tell Daddy I wrote you. He said it's confusing. Diane held the paper in both hands like it was glass. Not angry, not afraid, just heartbreakingly clear. She read it again. then again. And then she reached for the drawer beside the sink, the one with stamps, scissors, and leftover recipe cards. She found the box of Charleston postcards she'd bought on impulse last spring. Sunsets, pelicans, cobblestones. She chose one with the lighthouse, the sky behind it the same color as Benji's eyes. On the back, in her neat cursive, she wrote, "Dear Benji, I'm proud of you, for the math test, and for being kind. You can always write. No one can stop that. Love, Nana." She sealed it, kissed the edge of the card like it might carry through the mail, and walked it straight to the blue mailbox on the corner. That evening, Nina leaned back in the porch chair and shook her head slowly. "That kid knows who's safe. That's rare." Diane didn't answer right away. She stared out at the marsh where the tide was rolling in slow, steady, relentless. "He's always had a good gut," she said. "Even as a baby, he'd go quiet around shouting. He could read a room better than most grown men. And now he's stuck in a house full of emotional potholes." Diane swallowed. "And I can't save him from it. Not yet." "You can show him what steadiness looks like," Nina said. "And maybe that'll be enough." Diane found an old wooden box in the attic, cedar-lined, with brass hinges that still held. She dusted it off, lined it with fabric from one of her mother's quilts, and placed Benji's letter inside. Then she added a photo of them from his 3rd birthday party. He was covered in chocolate frosting, smiling with his entire face. A ticket stub from the aquarium he loved. The postcard she'd just sent. She'd taken a picture of it first, just in case. The box wasn't big, but it was sacred now. She wasn't hoarding nostalgia. She was building proof that he had been loved, seen, and heard by someone who never demanded anything in return. At 10:04 p.m., her phone lit up with a message from Eric. "Stop confusing him." Diane didn't even flinch. No reply, no read receipt. 10 minutes later, her email pinged. From Laura Marsh. Subject, concerned. "You're hurting our family by pulling away. Benji asks questions you shouldn't be planting. We need you to stop making things harder." Diane hovered her cursor over the reply button, then clicked archive instead. She told them where the line was. They'd just never imagined it would stay drawn. The petition was laughable. Miles said so the moment she stepped into his office, coat still damp from the morning fog. "Filed prosi," he said, flipping through the stapled documents like they were junk mail. "No legal representation, just pages of vague concern. Says you're exhibiting erratic withdrawal from family roles and creating emotional confusion for minor relations." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Minor relations?" "That would be Benji, I assume," Miles said. "He's accusing you of intentionally disrupting his parenting." "By existing independently?" Miles smiled dryly. "Essentially." She didn't pace. She didn't even sigh. "Let's respond formally," she said. "And I want to be there, in court." The hearing took place in a small county courtroom with flickering overhead lights and seats that still smelled like dust and polyester. Diane sat with Miles in the second row, calm as a tide pool. Eric was across the aisle, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit. Laura wasn't beside him. She didn't come. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a hard jaw and a soft gaze, read the petition in silence, then looked up. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "there is no legal basis for this request, no substantiating evidence, no precedent, no standing." Eric opened his mouth, closed it. The judge's tone didn't shift. "Your mother has passed a third-party capacity evaluation. She has updated her legal documents within her rights. Her decisions are protected." Miles didn't speak. He didn't need to. Diane's hands stayed folded in her lap. She didn't smile, but her spine had never sat taller. The gavel came down with a polite tap. "Petition is dismissed." Outside, in the courthouse parking lot, Diane stood by her car and stared at the oak trees lining the road. They were shedding, soft, brittle leaves twisting in the breeze, drifting into gutters. Eric walked past her on the way to his car, head low, not meeting her eyes. She let him pass. Then she said, to the wind more than to him, he thought silence meant surrender. Her breath fogged the air. "It meant I was done arguing." Nina insisted on a celebration. "Not a party," she said, hauling in a pie tin and a carafe of mimosas. "Just a quiet victory brunch. You bring the triumph. I'll bring the crust." They sat at Diane's kitchen table, sun warming the wood grain between them, and ate forkfuls of tart cherry pie while the wind pressed softly against the window panes. No balloons, Diane teased. Too loud, and you hate helium voices. Diane took a long sip of her drink. I used to think winning meant everyone agreeing I was right. And now, she smiled. Now I think winning is when you don't need their agreement to move forward. They clinked glasses, pie crumbs scattered. No fanfare, just peace. That night, Diane opened her shared photo drive out of habit, mostly to download a picture of Benji from his last school recital, but the album was gone. She checked again. Family album 2012-2024, removed by owner. She didn't flinch, she just closed the app. If deleting her from digital history made Lara feel in control again, so be it. But memory didn't live in pixels. Diane still had the real moments, the sticky kisses, the giggles from the back seat, the midnight diaper runs. You don't erase motherhood with a click. 3 days later, a padded manila envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a spiral-bound booklet titled My Hero. Crayon illustrations, stiff paper, a class project from Benji's second grade class. On the first page, in careful block letters, my hero is my grandma, who always tells the truth. Diane sat down right there in the hallway, the paper resting in her lap like a medal she didn't ask for, but desperately needed. The folding chairs squeaked under shifting weight. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and indifferent. The room, part of the public library's community wing, smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee in cardboard cups. Diane sat on a modest dais between two other women, both younger, both talking about boundaries and burnout. She was here because someone from the church had invited her. Just to share a little, they said. You don't even have to prepare anything. She hadn't. But when the moderator turned to her and said, Diane, would you like to share your perspective? She didn't hesitate. She adjusted the mic with calm fingers. I used to confuse sacrifice with love, she said, her voice even and quiet, but it cut through the air like a tuning fork. I thought if I gave more, time, money, energy, it meant I loved more, or worse, that I deserved love in return. A hush spread across the room, the kind that didn't need to be asked for. I gave until I disappeared, until I realized no one ever asked me if I was tired. They just got quieter when I stopped saying yes. She paused, not for effect, for breath. And when I finally stopped saying yes, they called me selfish, difficult, confusing, because people who are used to being handed everything don't react well when you put the tray down. One woman in the back wiped her eyes. Another started recording on her phone, the lens angled discreetly. Diane finished softly. I didn't leave my family. I just stopped financing their denial. The room exhaled all at once. Applause followed, not thunderous, not forced, just steady, real. Someone stood up and clapped longer than the others. Later that night, Nina couldn't stop smiling as they walked out into the parking lot. The sky overhead a soft purple bruise. You just gave a TED Talk in pearls, she said, nudging Diane's arm. I just told the truth. Exactly. And that's what makes it dangerous. By the time Diane got home, her phone had already buzzed twice. A friend from her walking group had messaged, My daughter saw a clip of you speaking tonight. She said, That's my mom's story. Thank you. An hour later, I didn't know anyone else felt like this. You made me feel sane. Diane sat at the kitchen table, her tea cooling beside her, as the notifications kept coming. A local parenting blog had shared the video. Within 12 hours, it had racked up nearly 40,000 views. She didn't feel exposed. She felt heard. At 12:09 a.m., a private message slid into her inbox. Lara Marsh. So now you're a martyr. Diane stared at it for exactly 3 seconds, then closed the app, didn't reply, didn't read it again. There was nothing in that message she didn't already know. Instead, she stood up, crossed the room, and opened the cedar box on the top shelf of her hallway closet. The letter from Benji still sat in its envelope, folded neatly, unbothered. She added one more thing. A printed screenshot of the school project. My hero is my grandma, who always tells the truth. And then, carefully, deliberately, she slid the panel program inside. It had her name on it in block letters and a small caption beneath, Speaking Truth with Grace. The box closed with a soft click. And with it, another door in her heart shut quietly behind her. The call came at 11:03 p.m. The house was dark except for the hallway light Diane always left on, the one with the soft amber glow that made shadows kinder. Her phone buzzed against the nightstand, screen lighting up with Eric's name. She didn't move to answer, didn't even reach for it. She just watched the screen pulse once, twice, 3 times, until it went black again. The second it did, she exhaled, long and even. A second later, one new voicemail. She didn't listen. Not yet. She turned off the light, rolled onto her side, and went back to sleep with the kind of peace that doesn't come from hope, but from the end of hope. The next morning, Diane sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea cooling in her hands. The sky was gray, the kind that never quite commits to rain, and her back ached the way it always did when the weather turned damp. She finally played the message. "Hey, Mom, I know it's late, but things are just really unstable right now. It's not forever. I just need a little help getting through this patch. You've always been the one who kept things from falling apart. I don't have anyone else. Please." There was no anger in his voice this time, no arrogance, just that familiar thread of assumption, that she would fix it, that she would come. Diane pressed delete, then stood up and opened the window, letting in a breeze that smelled like wet pavement and pine. Later that afternoon, she met Nina at the farmer's market. They strolled the stalls slowly, sipping cold brew and debating peaches versus nectarines. "I heard he called," Nina said casually, selecting a pint of blackberries. "You always hear," Diane said, smiling faintly. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Nina paused. "You didn't call back?" "No." A beat passed. Then Nina grinned. "That silence you gave him? That's power." Diane didn't grin back, but she did nod, quiet, steady. That evening she baked a pie, cherry and almond, with a golden lattice crust she brushed in cream and sugar like a ritual. When it cooled, she slid it into a cardboard bakery box and wrote a note in tidy script. "Not everyone goes hungry." DM. She dropped it off at the senior center anonymously. A volunteer waved from the kitchen door, not recognizing her. That felt right. Diane walked back to her car slowly, sleeves pushed up, wind tugging at the loose ends of her hair. No one owed her anything. And that, she realized, was finally mutual. That night, she sat with a book in her lap, and her feet curled beneath her when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Nina. "You see this?" Attached, a screenshot of a GoFundMe. "Help us regain stability. Support Eric and Laura Marsh-Header image." A filtered photo of Benji holding a handmade sign that said "Family Matters." The description was long and vague, something about recent setbacks, housing insecurity, estrangement caused by miscommunication. No names were mentioned, but the implication hovered like a shadow. Diane didn't donate. She didn't click the heart button. She didn't share the post. Instead, she stared at the photo of Benji, his smile strained, his shoulders too still for a kid his age, and whispered to herself, "He didn't write that sign." Later, she opened the cedar box again, added a copy of the GoFundMe screenshot, a note beneath it, "Your handwriting is better than that. I know." A photo of the pie she'd dropped off. Still steaming on her counter, the box was getting full. So was her clarity. The rain was steady that morning, soft against the windows, the kind that never asked for thunder to make its point. Diane sat across from Miles in his office again, the same oak desk, the same lemon scent, but this time she brought a folder with a single page clipped to the top. Her handwriting filled half of it. The rest she wanted typed exactly as written. "Miles," she said, sliding it toward him, "I want to add one final amendment." He adjusted his glasses. "You're donating the estate?" "Not donating," she said. "Redirecting to something that grows." He read the paragraph, eyebrows lifting slightly as he reached the line. "All assets, property, and investment bonds shall fund the Charleston Youth Reading Initiative, established in honor of Benjamin Marsh, to be released when he reaches the age of 25, and can choose for himself whether to accept stewardship or decline it." Miles looked up. "You're protecting him from them." "I'm protecting his options," Diane said. "He deserves something that isn't filtered through their excuses." Miles smiled, A small, admiring one. You realize they won't be able to touch a dime. That's the idea. By afternoon, the documents were signed, notarized, and sealed. Diane left the office lighter than she'd entered. Her umbrella stayed closed despite the drizzle. The air felt new. At home, she brewed tea and watched the gray light slide across her living room walls. The house, quiet as ever, didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Her phone buzzed near 5. Unknown number. She let it ring out. Minutes later, a text arrived from her cousin Ruth. Laura called me, said this whole inheritance thing is damaging, that you're trying to hurt the family. Diane typed slowly, then hit send. Silence isn't damage. It's peace. The next week, a call came from Benji's elementary school. Mrs. Marsh, the voice said, gentle, careful. We're hosting our annual reading week, and Benji asked if you'd like to come read to his class. Diane felt her breath catch. He asked for me. He did, the teacher said. Said you tell stories better than anyone. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she smiled. Tell him I'll be there. Friday morning, she stood in front of 20 second graders, holding a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Benji sat cross-legged in the front row, his pencil clutched in both hands, his smile small but steady. Nina sat in the back, pretending to check her phone but really just watching, eyes bright. When Diane reached the part where Charlotte's Web spelled some pig, she paused, let the words linger in the air like something sacred. Benji whispered, "That's my favorite part." She winked. "Mine too." The class clapped when she finished. The teacher thanked her twice, but it was the look on Benji's face that undid her, a mixture of pride, safety, and something wordless that felt like forgiveness. Outside, as parents arrived for pickup, Nina linked arms with her. "You realize that was a full circle moment, right?" Diane exhaled, her voice quiet but sure. "No, this is the beginning of a new circle." That evening, back home, she opened the cedar box once more. Inside went a copy of the new will, folded neatly, the school's invitation letter, and a photo Nina had snapped that morning, her sitting in the classroom, children leaning forward as she read aloud. She placed them under the old postcard she'd written to Benji months ago. The layers of her story pressed together like pages of a book that had finally found its ending, but not closure. Something better, continuation. The knock came mid-morning, steady and sharp, like someone who didn't want to be there but couldn't stay away. Diane opened the door without checking the peephole. Eric stood on the porch, his arms crossed, face pale and drawn. His jaw twitched, like he'd practiced something and forgotten it the second she opened the door. "We need to talk," he said. Diane didn't step aside. "Then talk." A beat passed between them, not tension, vacancy, like an old bell that had rung too many times and no longer echoed. Eric exhaled hard and stepped inside without being asked. She didn't stop him, but she didn't offer him coffee either. He stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the bookshelf like it offended him. Then, turning sharply, "You've turned Benji against us." Diane blinked slowly. "No, you did that by turning me into a cautionary tale." His face darkened. "He's asking questions we're not ready to answer." "That's not his fault," Eric's voice cracked, just a little. "He's just a kid." "No," she said calmly. "He's your kid. And you made me the villain in a story you wrote to justify your own comfort. He's just rewriting the ending." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in him broke. It started small, like a glitch in his expression. Then came the shift in breath, the collapse in his shoulders. He sank onto the edge of the couch and buried his face in his hands. Diane stood still. He cried. It wasn't performative, it wasn't loud, but it was real, the first time in years, maybe the first time ever in front of her. Still, she didn't move. She didn't touch his shoulder, didn't offer a Kleenex, didn't kneel down to meet his grief. Because this wasn't a bridge, it was a mirror. And Eric, for the first time, was seeing what he looked like without the buffer of her forgiveness. After a few minutes, he stood. His eyes were rimmed red, his voice hoarse. "You'll regret all this." Diane didn't flinch. "That's your hope, not my fear." He hesitated, then turned and walked out the door. She didn't watch him go. She just closed it, quietly, slowly. like sealing off a draft that had always made the house colder than it needed to be. Later, Nina showed up with iced coffee and instinct. She found Diane in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand even though the dishwasher worked fine. "He came," Nina said. "Not a question." Diane nodded. "Did he say what he wanted?" "Control," Diane said, in apologies clothing. Nina set down the coffees and leaned against the counter. "You okay?" Diane dried her hands, one by one, folded the towel, and said, "That felt like ending a long lease on guilt." She turned toward the window, watching the sun cut through the clouds, sharp and golden. "I finally stopped renting peace to people who never paid for it." The drawing had been folded into the back of Benji's school folder, tucked behind math worksheets and permission slips, like it was waiting for her. A stick figure version of her stood beside an impossibly tall flower, one hand raised in a wave. Over the top, written in crayon with charming overconfidence, "My grandma makes things grow." Diane framed it in a simple pine frame and hung it beside her kitchen window just above the sink. Sunlight hit it every morning around 8. It made her smile every time she rinsed a mug or sliced into a tomato. Some mornings, she touched the glass, lightly, just with her fingers, like saying a quiet hello to someone who had already chosen her back. She dug the hole herself. The soil was clay-heavy, and the shovel caught on old roots from the oak that had been cut down years ago. But Diane didn't stop. Sweat rolled down her back, and her knees ached, but it didn't matter. The rosebush sat beside her in a black plastic pot, full of tight pink blooms and thorned stems like little swords. She named it Boundaries. The tag from the nursery called it Edith's Hope, but Diane scratched that out with a Sharpie and wrote her own name on it in small block letters. She planted it in the center of the front yard, where everyone could see it, not as a warning, as proof. Sunday dinners looked different now. No casseroles brought out of guilt. No strained small talk at the table. No waiting for people who showed up late and left early. Now there was Nina, always with 2 bottles of sparkling cider and her latest rant about the HOA. And sometimes June, who ran the front desk at the senior center and could tell a story like it was a one-woman play. And Harriet, who baked her way through grief and always brought too much cornbread. They passed dishes. They laughed hard. They cleaned up without being asked. No one arrived expecting anything but presents. No one left without saying thank you. That night, Diane wrote in her journal, the leather one she bought after her birthday, the one that hadn't yet held a single apology. She pressed the pen to paper and wrote, "No more gifts wrapped in guilt. No more generosity disguised as bargaining chips. I plant what I water what I want." She paused, tapped the pen twice, then wrote one more line. "This piece is not quiet. It's earned." The next morning, her phone buzzed. She expected another reminder from the library about the guest reading program or a weather alert about the wind. But it was from Lara, a text. "Happy birthday." That was all. Diane stared at it for a moment, not surprised, not moved. She typed a reply, "Thank you." No emoji, no warm sign-off, no invitation for more. It wasn't cold. It was true. Later that week, Miles stopped by with a thick envelope and a soft smile. "Everything's settled," he said. "The reading initiative is fully registered. The trust is locked. The filings are complete. It's all yours, or rather, all Benji's." She took the envelope. Heavy, final. "Feels strange," she said, "like putting the last brick on a house you didn't know you were building." "You built it," Miles said, "because the last one never had a foundation, just expectations and habit." She nodded, holding the envelope to her chest. "This one's solid." Miles looked around the living room, at the framed photo of her and Benji, the blooming bouquet of farmers market tulips, the shoes by the door that weren't hers, but always returned. "You've made a home," he said softly, without compromise. That night, she stood by the kitchen window, watching the wind tug at the rosebush. It bent. It didn't break. She touched the edge of Benji's drawing again, smiled. Outside, the front porch light clicked on. Tomorrow would come, same as always, but it would find her rooted. The legacy luncheon was held in a modest banquet room at the community center. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs dressed in white linen, mason jars of daisies on every table, iced tea sweating in plastic pitchers. Diane arrived early, like she always did. She wore navy slacks and a pale blouse. No brooch, no pearls. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She looked like someone who had nothing left to prove and no one left to impress. Nina was one of the featured speakers. She had written notes on index cards, but barely looked at them once she stood behind the podium. Most people think silence is weakness, she said, her voice firm but warm. But Diane taught me silence is a doorway, one you walk through when you're done performing strength and ready to live it. She looked out across the room and nodded toward Diane. Some people give everything they have to keep peace that was never theirs. And then one day, they stop. Not to hurt anyone, but to save themselves. That's Diane. There was a pause, wide and respectful. Then slowly, Diane stood. She didn't speak, didn't wave. She walked to the podium, pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag, and carefully unfolded the crayon drawing. My grandma makes things grow. She placed it on the podium, smoothed the crease, and looked out at the room. Then she nodded once, turned, and took her seat. The applause started like a ripple, and then rose. It lasted long enough that someone in the back stood. Then another, and another. Someone took a video. It hit local social media that night. By morning, elder advocacy groups across the country were resharing it with captions like, "Power looks like this. For every woman who gave too much and finally stopped. Let them call it quiet. You'll know it was grace." Eric never called again. Laura didn't come for Christmas or Easter or any Sunday in between. The silence between them no longer crackled with tension. It just held. Diane didn't fill it. She let it be. 2 months later, a letter arrived in handwriting she recognized instantly. Smaller now, neater, the pencil pressure lighter. "Hi, Nana, we read about you in school today. Our teacher showed your video. People clapped. She said you were strong. When I grow up, I want to be like you. Love, Benji." Inside the envelope was a second drawing, him and Diane standing under a tree, a single word written in capital letters across the top. Still. She placed it in the cedar box with the others, then she closed the lid and left the room. That night she made salmon, pan-seared, the way she liked it. Steamed green beans with lemon and cracked pepper. A slice of leftover cornbread from Sunday dinner. Warmed in the oven until the edges crisped again. She ate alone. No music, no television. Just the clink of her fork and the soft sound of her own breath. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt intact. After the dishes were done, she wiped the counters, turned off the porch light, and stood for a moment in the doorway. Watching the rose bush sway gently in the evening wind, she smiled, then turned out the light.